Yeah, extreme suds. It's kind of how I feel. Retrofit schemes we've done, they're really quite challenging. It makes them quite fun as a designer. Lots of solutions and innovation needed. But it really does, to me, feel like extreme suds when you're in a retrofit environment. But first, touch on why I love suds. Because, well, it creates places like this, places that are beautiful for people to live in, and where the suds generates the character of the landscape, but also at the same time, with a sustainable drainage element, it's helping us as a society function more sustainably. And because sustainable drainage really, I find, connects the kind of different aspects of urban design, things like biodiversity, blue infrastructure, green infrastructure, all the different uses that people have, whether it's recreational uses of green space and open spaces, transport corridors, but also offers a lot of opportunity for integrating those into our need for climate change adaptation. So helping with heat island effect, with evapotranspiration and greening of the city. As we've seen in Philadelphia in recent years, amazing differences in not only the sort of physical appearance of Philadelphia, but its functionality in terms of sustainable drainage. But why do I love retrofit suds? Well, it gives me a chance to right some of the wrongs that we've inherited. So whilst we're trying to roll out suds on all new developments, we've inherited a lot of problems. So here in Gloucester, not here, but where we come from in Gloucester, we're quite used to flooding. And a bit like in Scandinavia, when it snows, 6 feet of snow, they still get to work. In Gloucestershire, we just get on our jet skis and we still go to work. So in a way, this is something we've kind of brought on ourselves with the way we've developed over the last sort of few hundred years. And things that a lot of people don't know about. I think a lot of members of the public don't really understand combined sewer overflows. In lots of the older parts of urban development, we've got one pipe that takes foul sewage and surface water, and they're designed to only be able to accommodate a certain level of storm, beyond which they, rather than flood out into roads and houses, ideally, they go through designed outlets into our natural water courses, taking a lot of surface water, but at the same time raw sewage into natural water courses. And that's the sort of thing that we're trying to tackle with retrofit suds. Also, a lot of people aren't aware of just quite how polluted road runoff is. Hydrocarbons, heavy metals, all coming off vehicles. And especially in summer months, they accumulate on the surface and they get washed through as a cocktail of toxins, quite often, again, into our natural water courses, into streams and rivers. And this image here, most people would think there's been some kind of environmental accident, like a tanker had fallen into a river or something like this. But these thousands of dead fish have basically been killed by a summer storm. Simply that. The level of pollutants building up on London's roads over a period of drought last summer, when that first rainstorm did come, it flushed all those toxins at such concentrations into the River Lee that it killed thousands of fish. And along with it, obviously, that's the most visible victim, but obviously lots of other organisms will have been killed off at the same time. So again, SuDS gives us the opportunity to try and remedy some of these things that we've inherited. But it is, as I said, very challenging, extreme. You have to work with existing topography. You can change some things, but there's certain features that they're there already. It's already been built. We're not influencing the master plan. We can't move things around. We can't change levels of buildings. There are certain things that are there, and it would be very expensive to move. A classic one, and George might recognise the. We're working with George at Hammersmith and Fulham on Goldhawk Road, trying to get SuDS into a typical London high street. It kind of all looks feasible on the surface, and I'm sure a lot of people that have dealt with sort of retrofit SuDS have seen this. It looks feasible on the surface. As soon as you start getting your surveys and having a look at what's underground, you find, especially in London, you've got hundreds of years of layers of services. You know, everything from your Victorian sewers to your fibre optic cables. And it makes trying to find space to do sort of underground-based storage and SuDS features very, very difficult. But the other thing is we're not just inheriting an existing landscape, we're also inheriting an existing community, and this is also what sets it apart from new development. With a new development, we're designing for a hypothetical community that's going to move into that development. So there are less people who are active stakeholders. With Retrofit SuDS, we've got a very real community that we're imposing a SuDS system onto. I'll talk a bit more about that and the importance of that in a minute. You also come across, I mean, this is typical of SuDS as well, a lot of resistance to change and new working practices at all levels, sometimes within government departments, right down to local community. And I think we've experienced quite a lot, a lack of knowledge and experience in some of the related professions, and that can be from the designers, engineers, right through to finding landscape contractors who are proficient enough at implementing some of the landscape-based SuDS schemes that we do. So whereas typically landscape contractors might work to a tolerance of theoretically 50 mil in your specification, but quite often they could get away with 300 mil of variation in some landscape features, and it would never really make any difference. But of course, even 50 mil within a SuDS scheme can make the difference to whether water runs one way or the other. And so we're finding a lot of contractors just don't have the rigor that we have in our design. Yeah, that can be a real problem. Here's an example of the sort of scenario, a sort of roadside verge which you might look at, and we've done a number of these sorts of schemes with angling water. It just looks so feasible that you're going to get some like an attenuation swale or some sort of rain garden type things in there. Chances are, there's kind of 5 or 6 services spread themselves out nicely across that verge, and they tend to be quite costly to move. It's all feasible, but it all would become very costly to start moving all those services across. But there are very, very many opportunities, and this is just one I took from Docklands Light Railway. Spaces like this, which actually typically between social houses, typically there are very few services in environments like this. And also, I don't know if you notice, very underused space. So we can actually use SuDS in a space like this, a space that's easily available. We could actually use that to give something back to the community, make an exciting landscape, and use it to right some of those past wrongs. And also SuDS in different parts of the country and different parts of London, we find we design to different drivers. Sometimes it's trying to target specifically CSOs, the work we did with Dave on some of the rain garden projects. We were trying to reduce CSOs because that was the biggest issue that we had within the catchment. A lot of the work we do with a charity called Thames 21 is all about water quality. They get funding to improve water quality in the River Lee, where the picture of the dead fish were. So we're working with them cleaning up our polluted urban waterways. Or maybe it's just surface water flooding. But with Retrofit, because we're not simply designing to the 1 in 100 plus 30%, we can tailor the design to target specific requirements, which makes it quite interesting. Also, we found Retrofit offers us the opportunity to sort of stretch the definition of SuDS beyond its normal remit. So we're starting to take in elements of integrated constructed wetland treatment in our designs, which I'll come on to again later. So back to that, the community, the community that we're inheriting with a site that we want to do SuDS on. What we find is quite often where we're going to do a SuDS installation, the local community aren't going to really benefit in terms of water quality and flooding. Often those benefits are somewhere else within the catchment. and it'll often be people they don't know. It might be if it's a river that's being polluted, it might be a river they've never heard of and they never visit, and they may never visit it. So we feel it's very important that the people, where we put in a SuDS intervention, that it needs to give something back to that community. So the sketch behind there is, again, a project we're doing with Hammersmith and Fulham, Australia Road, where really the landscape is about giving something back to that community, about giving something constructive to that community, but it also serves a SuDS function. When you don't, this isn't retrofit, but it's a great example of how SuDS can create unusable spaces. This was meant to be a green space used by the community. It didn't used to have these railings around. But because of the way it's been designed, the basin is so deep, the headwalls are so dangerous, and the side slopes are so steep, that for safety reasons, the local community aren't allowed in that space. So in its worst case, SuDS can kind of sterilize community landscapes. So back to Australia Road, the broad brief was to limit traffic on about a 100-metre stretch of road and introduce highway SuDS features. And you just see it in this photo. There's a little kid walking along the wall there, this wall in the foreground. They're very clear we had to keep that existing wall. Not only is this generation of children walking on that wall every day from school, but a lot of their parents did as well. So there's a very strong feeling in the community that we needed to keep this wall. There's a school, the school is on the left, and there's also 2 playgrounds on the opposite side of the road, which cater for every age range from sort of 0 to sort of 16, 17. There's an adventure playground. So we worked to kind of redefine that brief slightly, and really kind of put the emphasis a little bit more back on the community. So the idea that we're creating a linear community park. And also with the school on one side of the road and these 2 playgrounds on the other side, it really felt like not just a communal landscape, but one that was should be really focused around families and children. So we created this family-orientated, playful hub space when I spoke to the local community about their very straight wall that they'd walked along for 2 generations, they're very clear that they wanted to keep it. But then when I said, well, okay, what if as part of our design we give you a wiggly wall that weaves between trees, and there's kind of like a planted basin below this sort of landscape area, and occasionally it fills up with water. They all were, well, yeah, fantastic, that'd be brilliant. We'd love that for our kids. And then when I started talking about the sort of space we're trying to create, we're trying to limit the traffic that goes through there to emergency vehicles and service vehicles only, and we're trying to make it pedestrian priority space. People were like, well, yeah, that's great. That's a safe place where my child can learn to ride a bike, where we can meet as a community, we can have markets, we can have fairs. So really we sort of changed the orientation of the project to be about community. And then we've got buy-in from that community. We've got community groups that want to help do the planting, want to help maintain the landscape, which, if we'd simply gone in there and imposed something on them, the chances are you wouldn't get that buy-in. So here, this sort of diagram demonstrates we've sort of realigned the access route through to make any vehicles that do have to go through sort of wiggle through. And we've taken runoff from adjacent roofs, overhead in sort of overhead channels, and dropping down into this sort of this main basin in the middle, which has the wiggly balance wall running through it, and various other sort of bioretention basins and rain gardens around the space, all serving that SuDS function. But really, there's an awful lot of design there, which is about how people use that space as well, and also making the most of that flow of water. So the reason we took the roof water overhead and we're going to drop it down into the basin is because we're going to make it drop down in exciting, interesting ways. Maybe things will move as the water comes down, or the water will spray or come down a chain, or it'll go down a series of buckets. But so when it rains, we want people to go out and look at that landscape and see it come alive, and ideally walk along that balanced wall with the added sort of excitement of there being water below. Not very deep. But really, the SuDS, for the local community, they they do buy into the importance of the environment and importance of reducing flooding further downstream. But this is in Whitehill, and their priorities, their day-to-day priorities, are much more immediate and much more personal. And it's the sort of space that we can create for them that is far more important for them and responds to their day-to-day needs. It's the rain garden that we've done with the Environment Agency groundwork and Thames Water. Renfrew Close is over in near University of East London, at Cypress Station on the London's Docklands Railway. It comprises a pretty uninspiring, quite typical uninspiring sort of green space between 3 blocks of social flats. This area has a 2-pipe sewer system, so you've got a separate foul and surface water. And here we've inherited this. As I said, we've got an inherited network of paths and this service road on the left-hand side, and of course services and things like that. So what we did here is we took the rainwater off as many roofs as we could of those 3 blocks, including in some cases roofs on the other side from the main sort of courtyard space. Conveyed them towards 4 demonstration rain gardens. So we've got 4 rain gardens, each of which demonstrates a different style. Ornamental, a sort of natural play area, and productive garden, which again feeds into that kind of climate adaptation, the idea of a community growing space. Well, let's use SuDS to provide that with some relatively clean roof runoff to irrigate that, but also then that productive garden space will also be able to store water as a basin. And finally, a wildlife rain garden. But because we've inherited paths in various states of sort of repair and appearance, steps, ramps up to houses, we have to be quite innovative with solutions of moving that water around on the landscape, because this needed to be an affordable project. So we couldn't move things around too much and change levels too much. So we had quite a lot of fun taking water down channels, always trying to keep it on the surface wherever we can. Keep it on the surface where we do need to, where we go underneath the path. We keep the level of that channel under the path very low, so we've got minimal construction. So we're popping out straight back out into the landscape on the other side of the path. Similarly, underneath these steps, and this kind of channel network just reminds me of playing on the beach as a kid and still as an adult digging channels for rainwater. And here making water flow uphill. Of course, we know that's not possible even as landscape architects. But we needed, in some cases, we kind of have to defy topography a little bit. There was the main basin was over on the right-hand side of this existing road. Yet the road was falling that way, and there was really no space on that side to store anything. So we had to make the water kind of flow the opposite direction to the road camber. So we've got a kind of grated channel, but internally it falls the opposite way to get us into a basin. So often a lot of bespoke solutions to situations. If that was a new build, we'd just make the road fall the other way and take the runoff into that basin. So in this one, and a lot of schemes, I mentioned the kind of services. Often services not where they say they're going to be on all the stat records you get through. Often there are services that just haven't been recorded, and you only find them when the contractor starts digging. And very often they're shallower than they should be, so the contractor digs a little bit, and just underneath the turf there's a cable of some kind. But what we found, and especially with this work we're doing with Hammersmith and Fulham, things like GPR surveys and really detailed sort of services surveys really help in identifying where they are, so you've got that kind of certainty. And typically also it's worth mentioning with retrofit SuDS schemes, because the existing topography is so critical, we tend to work with a tighter survey grid. It doesn't generally cost much more to get surveyors to work to a tighter grid, but rather than working to a 5-metre grid, we get them to work to a 2.5 metre grid. And then we get them to produce 100 mil contours. So we actually get a much finer assessment of the existing landscape, which enables us to interrogate the levels much more accurately. One of the biggest lessons we learned on this project was, as I kind of touched on, with the sort of lack of expertise within various disciplines. Here, between the contractor and another organisation. We weren't paid to supervise this, unfortunately. Despite our advice, we weren't allowed to supervise the construction of this project. So although we detailed it to the nth degree, in the centre is an extract from our outlet detail, which shows a graded outlet on the 1 in 3 slope of the basin. So you can mow that, you can walk over it, there's no trip hazard, it fits into the landscape quite subtly. What we got was what was on the left. It's a trip hazard, you can't mow it, it looks ugly. You know, why did that happen? They had the drawings, it was all there. And quite often what you find is contractors take initiative. They think they kind of know what you're getting at and they think they've got a better idea, but they don't understand SuDS. And on the right is a great demonstration of what this was meant to be a sunken, this is the productive rain garden, it was meant to be a sunken garden, so it had storage. How it was built was a raised wall and no storage. You can see the inlets coming under the little pavement bridge, and there's no storage in there whatsoever. The soil is exactly at the same level as the water comes in. In fact, in some cases, yeah, it was above the outlet level. Bit of a disaster. So there is a saying that gets bandied around. You don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect, and that kind of supervision and inspection from the SuDS designer is really, really, really essential, more so than normal landscape projects. But what we have managed to achieve, it's still undergoing. There's still some sort of remedy of various things going on. But it's what it is. It's a functioning SuDS landscapes that those basins will store somewhere between the different basins between the sort of 1 in 5 rainfall return period up to the one in the foreground here has an extended basin, so it will store the 1 in 100 plus 30%. So what we're trying to do is, and some of these will be monitored for their performance, we're trying to demonstrate not just the different styles of rain gardens, how they can be integrated into a community landscape, but also how they perform at different return periods. And you know, it's a landscape that gives something back to the community, to all members of the community, from children to the adults doing the productive garden and just enjoying the wildlife coming into their neighbourhood. Thames 21, I mentioned, a charity. Really, their remit is to clean up the River Thames. They're particularly focusing on the River Lee and Salmons Brook at the moment. So with Ian Russell, I thought I saw, from Enfield, we're working on a number of projects. This one, Glenbrook, where we have a stream which is culverted until this point on the left, and then emerges into the landscape in a sort of wooded valley going down to a goose and duck lake. It's highly polluted, you can kind of see by the sort of water quality there. It's polluted because it's taking surface water runoff from roads and roofs, but also people have misconnected into those pipes over the years, and so we've got quite a lot of sewage coming down here as well. And so we've got quite a lot of sewage fungus growing in our stream. So we've got this highly polluted and deeply incised stream because it's taking these surges of flow from the roads, and the objective is to clean that up. We're trying to create a landscape that gives something back to people and wildlife, but treats that urban stream. Because people don't go in there because there's lots of rats and it smells. And we want that woodland space, which is surrounded by houses, to be a space that people can use, that they can go and enjoy, just to sit, walk their dog, go jogging, whatever. And by cleaning that stream up and opening it up to residents. So what we created was, again, we interrogated the levels to find areas where we could get basins offline, off the channel, to divert water at low flows off away from the channel through a wetland basin to bioremediate the pollutants in that water back into the channel until the next opportunity. So these sort of lighter green splodges each side of the stream are where we were able to divert water out, take it through a treatment wetland, and then bring it back into the stream again. So this will all be very heavily monitored. So hopefully by the end of it, there will be some noticeable change in water quality, and hopefully this will inform future projects. So here's an example of the sort of weir detail helping us divert water into the wetlands. And Here it is, it's under construction at the moment. This first primary wetland on the left-hand side, we had to put some retention in to maximise the space available for that basin, because that will be taking the biggest hit of pollutants and the biggest hit of silt and particulates. So this area, we expect, will need desilting occasionally. We don't know how often yet, but that will be a sort of watching brief. So you can see how we've got the weir down the left-hand side is in the main channel, but it diverts water into that wetland and comes out over this weir back into the channel again. But then when the flow increases, so we're trying to focus on the low flows, the day-to-day flows that carry the most pollutants. When a storm comes and those pollutants are being diluted and the rate of flow is much higher, it will carry on straight down the existing channel as it would normally. Another project with Enfield and Grovelands, Enfield and Thames 21 is Grovelands Park, where there are two surface water pipes which feed down into a culverted watercourse. Now, Enfield are working to deculvert that watercourse, and what we've done within Grovelands Park is to intercept those two surface water pipes and take them through the quite steeply sloped woodland in swales winding through the trees to a basin at the bottom of the valley, which will provide treatment. The treatment will occur within the swale. That will be a planted swale with Carex pendulous sedge, and the basin at the bottom will be full of sedge as well, providing treatment of that water before it's then being released into the new deculverted watercourse. And this is currently under construction, so it's looking a bit bare at the moment, bare earth. But at the sort of top of that picture, you can sort of see some boulders. Now that's our sort of hidden outlet where we've intercepted the surface water drain and taken it out through an outlet that basically can't be tampered with. No one can shove their sister's head up there, or a football, or a crisp packet, or anything. To all intents and purposes, it looks like a stream coming out from between some boulders. And the light's not great, but you can maybe just sort of make out we've got a sort of very gentle swale running through the trees here. And this is kind of a good example of basically, for all our detailed survey, for the many hours that I spent poring over that survey, plotting out a route for this swale, when it actually came to walking around with the ARB officer and finding that actually a number of trees weren't recorded on the survey, we actually basically had to plot the route pretty much on the ground with a spray marker, and basically, agreeing which trees. We had to take a few trees out, but we tried to minimise that. Also, we want to try and let a bit more light into this landscape, because the more light we can get into these sort of wetland treatment features, the better they bioremediate the pollutants. Ultimately, they both come in at each end of this basin. It's quite a sort of long, flat basin. This, again, will be planted with native pendulous sedge, which you would expect to see in a sort of damp woodland environment. And you can see, this used to be full of sort of self-seeded sort of scrub, and it's all been cleared out now, so there's a lot more light coming into here. So when this is all greened up and this is a lush basin, and the light's coming in, that'll look much more attractive space. And then we've got, how am I doing for time? Does anyone know? Okay. A couple of projects that are in design development at the moment. This one I mentioned, Goldhawk Road, very typical London High Street. So, going to be a great example of how we might roll SuDS out in this sort of very dense urban environment. So we see we've sort of identified opportunities at the roadside where we can try and get sort of tree plant bioremediation sort of device. The services have kind of quashed a lot of those. But here's basically the sort of principle. We're using taking the runoff at the surface straight into tree pits, so not via gullies, straight through the sort of curb level into a tree pit, and that provides our sort of source control for that water. So most of the kind of the silt loading and pollutants will be taken out at that point. And most day-to-day rainfalls will never make it out of that tree pit. So most rainfall events are helping to irrigate those trees. And then in the larger rainfall events, those tree pits will spill over, and the water will then spread into this sort of cellular structure, which also provides the appropriate sort of soil volume that a good urban street tree needs to grow in. You can't actually expect a tree to grow in a sort of 1 meter or a 2 meter wide tree pit. Each tree needs about 20 meters cubed of growing medium, which is quite hard to achieve in these tight urban environments. So where we are going to put something like that in to get a good street tree, well, with this sort of system, we can also use that as SuDS storage volume as well. So that's what we've got here, which we're hoping to roll out on Goldhawk Road. Another Thames 21 project, next to the A10, there's you wouldn't know it, but that's a surface water pipe. That is just meant to be surface water carrying the usual road pollutants. But as is very typical of our surface water pipes discharging into rivers and streams, it's got a lot of misconnections. Sometimes whole houses with 5 bathrooms and their kitchen and their washing machines, all discharging into what should be a surface water sewer, and with the resulting pollution that you can see here. So what we're doing is we're intercepting that surface water pipe sort of off to the south, about 500 meters south of this drawing, laying it at a very shallow gradient to bring it out into what is currently a sort of derelict sort of landscape, which has its own sort of biodiversity, but it's fairly uniform. And we're bringing it out into a series of sort of integrated constructed wetland sort of treatment basins. So we've got sort of on the left-hand side, there's sort of 2 basins linked with treatment swales, before then taking it through another swale back into Salmons Brook. And the whole idea of this space is that it's a park. It's a place that people can use. We're going to link it to the existing Berry Lodge Park as a sort of more wildlife extension of the very formal park. And we want people to see this, and we want people to see that when the water comes in, it's actually quite smelly. It's got things in that you wouldn't like to see, and we want people to understand that this is their water. They're doing this to the water, and then we want to see we want them to see how it improves in quality as it moves through the system. But at the same time, we've kind of taken the opportunity to take runoff directly off the A10. So again, these heavy metals, hydrocarbons, take those through across the road into swales, which will clean that water before going into a habitat and amenity pond to provide the sort of standing water, sort of wildlife habitat area, before again discharging into the Salmons Brook. Much cleaner water than it is currently. And this again will all be monitored for its efficacy, which again will inform future projects. But it really does require quite new thinking to dealing with sort of surface water flows. So, how do we take water off roads? So this is a classic solution of ours, which is to kind of fill in the gully, drop the curb, take it through a swale, but where we meet a path, we then need this sort of bridge detail. And this is sort of, on retrofit SuDS, you have to do a lot more of these sorts of solutions, we find. Trying to find ways around existing features. But yeah, well, that's what makes our work so interesting, really. I think that about sums it up, really. Thanks very much.